The year was 2015, and my best friend was sitting in front of his monitor playing a video game that I had never even heard of. He was absolutely gushing over the game. The level design, boss difficulty, and overall design was just absolute perfection to him. And that game was none other than From Software's Bloodborne. Alright, trust me, this is a good segue. Watching him play, I was introduced to a whole new gaming experience. I began playing Bloodborne, eventually getting to Dark Souls 3, and yeah, I did unfortunately beat the horrid Dark Souls 2. We'll have to talk about that in another video. So I thought the first video I was going to make on this channel was going to be on Bloodborne. It was the first From Software game I played, it was the first one I experienced, and as I was writing the script, I kept going back to a different game. It's the game that started this whole series off. Dark Souls was the first game in From Software's journey to creating some of the most well-known series of games in history. When it was released on the Xbox 360, it was met with immediate praise. People loved the challenging gameplay, incredible worlds that you get absolutely lost in, and a plethora of bosses that to this day are the most memorable in gaming history. So during the 360 days, I was obsessed with playing Madden. That's all I played. I never got a chance to experience Dark Souls for the first time. And I had to wait years for this remaster to come out. And when it finally did come out, I beat that game so many times. And so I figured, for the first video on this channel, we would start with the first game in the series of Dark Souls that started it all. Sit back, relax. We're going in a little bit of a deep dive into Dark Souls. If you were to ask someone what the story of Dark Souls is after their first run, you'll probably hear something like this. You're the Chosen One. You're tasked with saving the world of Lordran by linking the flame, and in order to do so, you gotta beat a lot of bosses in order to access the final boss that guards the fire, and when you beat him, you have the choice of saving the world or bringing darkness to it. And while that is the beef of the story, there is so much more complexity hidden in the layers of this game. Dark Souls is a story that if looked at from just it's a game where you beat a lot of bosses and have a confusing ending mentality, makes you miss so much of the game's amazing complexity. Littered throughout this world are items that you could find that have deep lore embedded into the description. By going around the world, you'll notice things like why the enemies are acting the way they are, or why certain statues are destroyed. You'll start asking questions about the game, and by asking questions, you start looking deeper into it, and you'll realize that most of this game has a massive amount of lore, a massive complex story, hidden within its simplistic look. I mean, you'll pick up a pendant, and you will read its description, and you'll find out who had it before you, why it got there, and why it's important for you to have it. It is so crazy how deep this game gets with its lore. If you dig a little deeper, you'll learn that you aren't just some generic chosen one who has to beat the bad guy. It's just so much deeper than that. You'll learn that before the Age of Peace, or Fire, mortals were underground while dragons ruled over them. One fateful day, someone discovered the fire. He was known as a Pygmy Lord. Him and 4 others, Gwyn, Nito, the Witch of Izalith, and Seath, used his power to take on their rulers from above. Once they won the war, the Age of Fire was introduced. Now comes our part. You see, the Age of Fire is slowly fading away. It's the end of the world. With the flame fading and the 4 lords unable to do anything about it, Gwyn left his home of Anorlando to the kiln of the first flame to keep the fire alive by linking it. While he does this, we are called to the prophecy of the undead, where we, the undead, are called to overthrow Gwyn and take his place, or usher in an Age of Dark. Which, when you look at the world now, as opposed to what you get when you leave, it kind of makes it like you're the bad guy if you choose to not link the fire. We, a hollow, unable to die, go on a quest around Lordran to overthrow the lords Nito, Seath, and the Bed of Chaos, in a last-ditch effort to save the world, or usher in a new age. And while this is a deeper dive into the story, I don't want to say too much. This is something that every player needs to experience for the first time. I could talk to you for hours about Gwyn, hours about Solera of Astora. I could go into a completely complex deep dive into how Artorias is one of the most tragic characters in gaming history. A knight who just wanted to save people, who got corrupted by something so dark that when you finally face him in the DLC, it's like you're facing a monster, not a man anymore. And oh my god, fighting Sif at his grave is just pure emotional gaming bliss. But I'm not going to do that.
because, again, you need to experience this. Instead, let's talk about the world's hardest game and how it doesn't deserve that title at all.
I remember saying the phrase, "this game is too hard," for the first time to my friend. I would say, how am I supposed to beat this game when I can't roll fast enough? How am I supposed to defeat a room of enemies when I'm just one guy? Or, I can't beat this boss, it's just too hard. Then he said something I'll never forget. Game isn't hard, it's challenging. Once I heard that, it was like a light bulb went off. I realized that if I didn't view it as impossibly hard, but instead as an obstacle that has a great reward for when I overcome it, I began to view the game's difficulty in a whole new light. I began to look at each situation, realize how it was going to play out, and act accordingly all in a span of a few seconds. The game isn't hard, the game is challenging. Even the creator, Miyazaki, said this: when you think about it, the difficulty in Dark Souls franchise, so far, has been something that players have eventually been able to overcome. Think about that phrase. The game wants you to overcome every challenge. There's one very big thing a player does instinctively whenever they are faced with a challenge in this game. Whenever you die to a horde of enemies, or a boss that just seems to kill you whenever you get its health bar to the size of an ant. And you know what that is? You keep trying. There are several reasons as to why this works so well, but there are two big ones. The first is the losing soul mechanic that this game has had since day one. Once you die, your souls are on the ground, and you have one chance to get them back. You start running back where you died, running through the whole encounter in your head, thinking of ways to better take on the enemies. You go through and defeat everything in your path, and then boom, you get your souls back, and you're ready to take on the next. And what happens when you die and you lose the souls forever? There's no point in going back and trying to get them. What do you do next? You take out some good old-fashioned revenge. You see, when an enemy kills you twice, you run back to them with the intention to kill them. When a boss defeats you, you do a speed run in order to get back to it and take them down as quickly as possible. You see, looking at it from "it's hard," you miss the point of the game's difficulty. If the game was hard, it wouldn't give you healing items to tank hits. If the game was hard, it wouldn't give you the ability to roll using the iframes mechanic so that enemies' hits don't register. If the game was hard, you wouldn't be able to upgrade your armor and weapons to better take on or deal damage. How about the fact that there are players trying different strategies to make the game even more challenging? For Christ's sakes, there's a fist-only run of this game. Do you know how hard it is to beat the game with a fully leveled up weapon or a fully leveled up boss weapon? Beating it with your fucking hands? If you are talking with a friend about the game, you will probably bring up the bosses several times in the conversation. Don't act like you don't do that. Anyone who's played this game talks about the bosses at least once when they're recommending it to a friend. What I mainly realized after my third run through the game is that bosses have a scaling method. When you start, you have the introduction to souls, the welcome to Dark Souls moment, when you hit the gargoyles, and then the famous get good moment when you reach the legendary Ornstein and Smough fight. The game wants the challenge to keep going for the player, so the bosses get more challenging with each iteration. As you go on, the bosses will get harder. Your first fight is with the Asylum Demon. Big arena, big enemy, and even a free hit if you go all the way to get your weapons. The game isn't going to start with a complex fight like Ornstein and Smough, or give you a screw you moment when you run into the Capra Demon and get thrown off by the design of the arena. The game wants you to learn, and by doing so, slowly increases the challenge from boss to boss. The bosses scale with you. As you go on, the game will get more challenging, and that's why the bosses get more challenging. If every boss was the Asylum Demon, you'd beat the game in 3 hours and call it done. And if every boss was Ornstein and Smough, you wouldn't want to play the game anymore because you've broken too many monitors playing it. You see, Dark Souls is more than just gaming history. It's a piece of history for me. I absolutely love this game. its deep, complex lore, its amazing bosses, the challenge. Every single time I boot up the game, I can't wait to be challenged. I love every aspect of this game.